Welcome to the Patrick Coffin Show. This is episode 152. As you know, this episode is brought to you by MyPillow. Go to mypillow.com, put my name, Patrick, as a coupon code at the checkout. You get an amazing discount. Buy one, get one free. My friend, the CEO founder, Mike Lindell, is offering a special bonus sale for my listeners. That's buy one, get one off. And these are bad boy pillows. I'm very picky about pillows. I've paid over $100 for these high-octane, super firm pillows. I'm that picky. Nothing compares to MyPillow. I have the travel version. I have the sheets. Check out mypillow.com. Find out what the buy one, get one deal means. It's mypillow.com. Check it out. Fantastic sale. Thank you, Michael Lindell. You're welcome in advance. Patrick at the checkout is the coupon that gets you that discount. Our topic is, we're laying this down, Halloween 2019, but it's evergreen content, and that is, what are the distinctions the church makes between hauntings and oppression and infestation and exorcism? Do souls from purgatories try to contact us from purgatory, I should say? Joining us to sort fact from fancy is Adam Blai. He's here, and he'll be joining us for a great conversation in under 5 seconds or so. Don't go away. Yes, indeed, Adam Blai is a peritus and religious demonologist for the Diocese of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He's been an auxiliary member of the International Association of Exorcists in Rome, and he provides training for exorcists across the United States. Adam further has a master's degree in psychology and has done most of his professional work in forensic settings. His latest book is called, wait for it, Hauntings, Possessions, and Exorcisms. Adam, great to have you aboard. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you, Patrick. It's nice to be here.
Now, most people, when they're 7 or 8, they want to be an astronaut or a fireman, a cop or a cowboy. When did you get involved in demonology and basically spiritual warfare? Where did this begin for you?
I got pulled into it during graduate school. So I was continuing to learn and work in clinical psychology and learning about diagnosing. And I had done a master's degree I was in brainwave analysis, essentially. So we were looking at the structure and function of the brain with shifts in consciousness. And I had looked at hypnosis as part of my master's and learned through that a healthy person could have hallucinations if they were hypnotizable. Not everybody's hypnotizable. It's basically a genetic trait. You either are or you're not. Not everybody is. But what I saw in the lab was, I had seen that with mental illness, you can have people that have hallucinations and false experiences. And I had seen that sleep disorders, which account for like 80% of what people think are demonic problems, are very real to people. But then I saw something really interesting, and that was if you're hypnotizable, completely psychologically healthy and biologically healthy, you can have hallucinations. And I said, well, then the brain is capable of producing these false experiences that to the person are 100% real. And I was absolutely. And this was at the same time that the paranormal TV craze was just starting, the very first of those shows. Before then, it would have been, it just wouldn't have been a topic. And so I said to myself, well, what if these people that they're putting on television, what if they're just having these false experiences? From a psychological viewpoint is the way I was looking at it. And so I was curious about that. And so I started looking into it and met people and talked with people and ended up doing an evaluation here in the Pittsburgh Diocese for a family in a case that's now become famous because he wrote a book about it, and the story is out there and it'll probably be made into a movie and all that kind of jazz. But in that process, I started connecting with the church to go look at the more serious, real cases, thinking, well, okay, maybe it's just the brain. And that's really what drew me into it. And I then stumbled across a truly possessed person relatively quickly, involved in a house case where we had no idea the person was possessed. And it was kind of like tripping and falling into the deep end of the swimming pool. where it's whoops, whoa, I'm covered in water, and I had no idea what was going on or what to do or how to deal with the situation. It didn't respond to what you would do in hypnosis or in psychotherapy. And things happened that were outside of what I understood. And so I said, well, it seems to me that this is actually a spiritual process. And that kind of started the road. And then God opened doors that are very unusual for a layperson. And then over like the last 15 years, I've just gotten more and more involved.
Could you say that the most skeptical organization in the world is the Catholic Church with respect to, say, the validity of miracles, or this is where the phrase devil's advocate comes from, or in your case, investigating something that might have a spiritual or preternatural component to it, but you first rule out more mundane, medically explainable phenomenon, right? That's the first go-to?
Sure. And actually, a lot of people are critical of the Catholic Church and critical of us for being so conservative and cautious and making people jump through so many hoops, which are reasonable hoops to jump through. What happens, Patrick, is a lot of times people will have a strange experience and they'll jump to the conclusion that it's demonic. And they'll say, well, this was strange and scary. I've decided it's a demon.
Yeah.
And they've leaped past all the more common explanations that are much more likely. And they've jumped to this conclusion of this incredibly rare thing. And they've then not gone to the doctor, not talked to a therapist, not looked into infections or medical problems that can cause hallucinations. And so great harm can be done if you too quickly endorse these kind of ideas. So yeah, the church figured out centuries ago that usually it's more psychological or medical issues. And so not only do you have to rule those out, but then you have to prove that there's a demonic problem. It's not simply saying, oh, well, the doctor can't explain it. We don't do exorcisms until we can prove there's possession. So the church actually has very high standards for this.
Let's go full Catholic 101, Adam, for a moment, for folks who just off the madding crowd into the tavern here and they're listening to this conversation. The Catholic Church teaches, following the Bible and sacred tradition, that there are angels. And those angels were created by God without bodies. Mortimer Adler, the philosopher, was fascinated by angels, and he said angel is a reverse statue. A statue is a body without a mind, and angel is a mind without a body.
That's interesting.
And some of those angels, traditionally we understand it to be about a third, rebelled, and they were kicked from the beatific vision out of heaven, thanks to the Archangel Michael, where they now tempt us into their own rebellion. Am I off so far? Is that a fair account?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And a demon is a synonym for an evil spirit.
Yes. There's some splitting of hairs, and some people think of them different ways depending on how much somebody looks at the Old Testament versus the New. And some people want to talk about the Book of Enoch, and they want to say that an evil spirit is slightly different than a demon in the Bible. But it's a fallen angel is a fallen angel is a fallen angel, whether you call it an evil spirit, an unclean spirit, or a demon. It's all the same thing.
Okay.
There's only very few players on the chessboard. And
we don't have to get into the more minutia-based article about whether there's 9 choirs, as Thomas Aquinas said, of angels. That seems very academic compared to the urgent need that some people do have in the real world for exorcism and for other prayers of deliverance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there do seem to be 9 categories of angels that we see in Scripture, kind of descriptions of the ranks. So we only get 3 proper names, the famous Michael, Gabriel, Raphael. But we get these kind of descriptions of categories. Think of them as ranks in the military. The angel and archangel and so on. And then different theologians have posited that the different ranks have different kind of functions within the economy of heaven and the universe as a whole. But is it worth trying to figure that out? It's not all revealed, and nor do we need all that information. People want to get fascinated about demons. They want to get fascinated about angels and kind of read too much into it, where God hasn't revealed all of it because we don't need to know all of it.
That's a good point. And
And
go ahead.
and we probably wouldn't understand it all anyway.
All right, let's go to the action of demons or evil spirits. How many levels of demonic effects on mankind are there? In other words, what are the levels of involvement or degrees of attack?
The church historically has delineated three, and that's infestation, which is when they get the right to do extraordinary things in a place. You want to be real clear about that. It's helpful to be clear. So that's basically when a demon is doing things in a place. Then you have oppression or obsession, depending on how obsessio is translated into English. You'll see it rendered two different ways. But what it boils down to is they now have the right to harass and attack a person in an extraordinary way. So the ordinary way is temptation. We experience that all the time.
That's built into the Our Father prayer, right?
Yes. And God allows it. Why? For our spiritual strengthening. Just like we have the struggles in the world of making a living and getting through the weather and making our way to work
Yeah.
and all the things that we push against in life, God allows the temptation so that we have a spiritual struggle, so we spiritually mature and get stronger. That's the ordinary activity. You can't get out of that. So infestation, oppression or obsession, depending on how you translate it, attacking the person to wear them down. And the goal there is to wear them down. And then the final one is possession, which is the one everybody has seen in the movies.
And is the most rare.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
What about a haunting? You mentioned place, because I wanted to ask you about the notion of place. I'm not disagreeing here. It's just sort of a question mark I have. If an angel is a spirit without a body, it doesn't occupy space, technically.
Right.
How can we understand an angel, or in this case a demon, doing something in a place if he himself has it itself has no body and therefore is not localized geographically? Do you see what I'm getting at?
Sure. And that's why, so what I said was the right to do extraordinary things in a place. You know, Thomas Aquinas talks about the angelic and also grace in general. It's kind of like the sunlight coming in through the window in a room. That sunlight floods in through the window, it affects the room, but that isn't the sun.
Right. So
there's something greater that has an impact in our kind of sense of reality, but that doesn't encompass the entire thing.
I see.
So the angel can have an effect on a place, but that doesn't mean it is limited to that place.
Yeah, that makes sense. Would that help explain why sometimes the foul odor that you mentioned in the book will actually move with the presence of the demon and not leave a residual smell or path?
Yes, because that's a preternatural effect. It's not like incense or a cigarette that you might, and it lingers in the room. It's more of an illusion that's impinged upon our nervous system, I think. I don't think if you were to take a sample of that air and take it to a lab and run it through a mass spec, that they would see anything in there except regular air.
Gotcha.
But anybody who walk through that area would say it smells horribly. I think it's an effect of an interaction with us. Everything that the demons do, and this is kind of a good foundational underlying thing to get, all of the things that they do are essentially parlor tricks to make us scared or manipulate us. So that smell isn't so much of like all demons have a bad smell, so you can track them down that way. That smell is this particular demon is doing this parlor trick to try to be disgusting or offensive or scary. Mm-hmm. And this is one of its parlor tricks. You know, you think of Thomas Aquinas, and he talks about angels being an individual species, and each one has a faculty, meaning kind of a talent, God-given to do some function. So the angel that was created to promote chastity in people, if it were to fall, if it were one of the angels that fell at the beginning, would then become a demon of lust because it still has the same faculty. That's the only faculty it has, but now it applies it in the reverse.
I see. Sort of the angelic version of the saying, the corruption of the best is the worst.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And so when you see something like the bad smell coming from an angel, fallen angel, a demon, is it has a faculty related to that in some way, and therefore that is its parlor trick. Other ones are good at making things fly around the room. Other ones are good at making voices come out of the air, et cetera, et cetera. It depends on what its faculty is.
I believe in Matt Baglio's book that became the movie, The Rite, I should say. He talks about things like sharp nails being upchucked by the possessed. And it's a very mysterious thing because demons can, of course, create anything, technically. What's up with objects that seem to appear? If you weigh them on a scale, they would weigh something.
Yeah, they're real. Like I've seen the boxes of, they keep them, boxes of nails and razor blades and shards of glass and everything else that have come from these sessions. For some reason, Patrick, that happens much more in Europe than it does here. It does happen here, but it's not as common. There it seems to be very common. So what I think we've seen more is the items that will sometimes come out of the person at the moment of liberation are related to how they became possessed in the first place. And so if there was a black magic charm or item that they ingested when it first started 15 years ago, 20 years ago, suddenly that same wad of feathers and beads and whatever else, undegraded, suddenly reappears. It's more of a symbol of the harm being undone than it is about the actual object. So,
I got it. So it's sort of a, I guess, token of the dark presence.
Yeah,
I think token's the word I want.
Yeah, and it's a token of the liberation of that's been removed from the person, because a person is a soul in a body, and so for that to come from the body is symbolic of some evil leaving the personhood.
I'm sure that you've seen The Exorcist, the 1973 horror classic. I wrote an essay a few years ago called The Unbearable Frightness of Being when the Exorcist turned 40, and none other than the original writer, William Peter Blatty, rest his soul, wrote me a very flattering email, thanked me for writing the essay, and that got me revisiting the movie, and I wanted to ask you about how that classic film has colored the public's imagination about what exorcism is, what possession is. How close do you think was the film iteration of the ritual close to things that you encounter in exorcism themes?
Well, what they did is they took everything that's happened in the last 700 years.
Right.
I could show you the book. I have it on the shelf behind me. There's basically a survey of possession and exorcism over the last 700 years that I believe Blatty probably read, because they took everything that happened and put it into one case and then amped it up a little bit. Yeah. So heads, to my knowledge, have never spun around, but we have seen bones dislocate spontaneously. We've seen the body bend in extraordinary ways to where you would think it's going to break. But the exaggeration of the head turning around is just nonsense.
What about the physiognomy of the face, kind of taking on animalistic form? I've heard that too.
Yeah, so it's yes, it happens, but it's more mild than in the movie. So what actually happens is the muscles of the face pull the face into a different shape when a particular spirit is animating the body. And so the face is still the person, but it changes enough to where you would still say, well, yeah, that's still the person, but boy, they look like they're wearing a prosthesis for being in a play or something like that. So it's not a complete 100% different, but the physiology physically moves and changes. It doesn't happen in all the time, but it happens enough, and the eyes will sometimes change also.
I wanted to ask you about multiple presences in someone in a possession. Do you get like 5 or 6 demons typically in a person, or one? Does Satan himself ever show up, or is it more of a minion type of demon?
Well, it's always a group. It's never one. So typically what you have, if you think of the 9 choirs that we mentioned, you can think of them as ranks in a military organization. Mm-hmm. And so essentially, I think what you can boil it down to is 3 types, 3 ranks. You got your functionary low-level privates your foot soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
not terribly bright, not terribly sophisticated, very violent, very chatty. Okay, sometimes very childlike in a bratty way. Again, surprisingly unsophisticated. Those low-level ones, you don't want to waste a whole lot of time with them, but you can if you don't know what to do. You can end up spending years dealing with hundreds of those in a case. Then you have middle management, which is basically the demon that's running the case, and that's in charge of the group that's in there. You want to skip to that one because that's the one that actually knows how the case started, knows what has to be undone, what rights they're claiming over that person. Mm-hmm. Then you have a higher level one, which is going to be kind of the general that may or may not come to fight for the case when the middle management goes. So you got tens to maybe 100, depending, of the low level ones that you don't want to waste time with. You got one or two middle management, and then you have a general right below Satan that may or may not come depending on how much hell is invested in that case. And those guys they're going to be your frequent flyers that you've met many times because there's only 4 or 5 of them. They're the big names from the Old Testament. And when you've been doing this for a number of years, you meet them over and over to the point where you recognize them as soon as they manifest and show up. They recognize us, having met us at other cases. And then the final thing, Satan usually does not come. In fact, he usually only comes when we, meaning the church, not me, the exorcist with the apostolic authority of the bishop, orders him to come. And that is when we usually deal with him, when the case is stymied and we need some information that he seems to be the only one that has it. The exorcist will order him to come, and he will. And then
Satan, that is.
Yeah.
This is killing 2 birds with 1 stone here. I want to emphasize, and I was going to mention this earlier, that the only authorized person to perform an exorcism, the Roman ritual, is a validly ordained priest with the order and permission of the bishop.
Right.
So I know in Protestant circles, there's a lot of talk about deliverance ministry, Catholics too. Everyone's laying hands on everybody else and demons are being, quote, expelled. But this is serious business and should not be the work of laymen or people who are not specifically and officially consigned by the church for this work. Yeah,
Patrick, it's incredibly important to talk about this because this actually creates some of the cases that we deal with. So let me give you an example of what I mean. We can be dealing with a case where we're diagnosing it. We don't know what's going on yet. Hold on, there's a little noise. Can you hear that?
Just barely.
Okay. The priest doesn't have permission from the bishop yet because we haven't figured the case out and gone for permission. Mm-hmm. But the demon is manifesting. The person's sitting there, they're in the demonic state, blah, blah, blah. He's putting on a show. And the priest may say, well, in the name of Jesus, sit down and be quiet. Maybe they're getting violent or something. And the demon will say, I don't have to. You don't have authority over me. I don't have to obey you. And will proceed to disobey. And won't tell the truth, won't answer questions, won't sit down and be still. Priest steps out in the hallway, calls the bishop on the cell phone and says, Bishop, I think we have a real case. Here's the evidence that I just saw. Would you give me permission? And the bishop says, yes, I give you permission. He walks back in the room. The demon's terrified. And he says, sit down and be quiet. It walks over, sits down, put your hands in your lap, puts its hands in its lap and waits for instructions. Radically different. Mm-hmm. They will call you on the legalism of it immediately because unless you have valid authority, they will not obey. Now, they may pretend to obey you, and this is where it gets real tricky with demons. They may play a game with you to bait you and make you think you have power over them in order to draw you in and get you to overextend yourself.
A sucker punch move.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the essential difference between deliverance and exorcism, and this is very important to understand, is one is, oh, Jesus, please help this person. Okay, so I say, oh, Jesus, please heal my father. He's sick. He has trouble with his heart. Jesus, please heal him. That's a request to God, and then God either responds or he doesn't. It's between God and my Father, right? So if I say, oh, Jesus, please deliver this person of this demon, it's between Jesus and the demon, because I've made the request and then Jesus does it. Exorcism is imprecatory. It's in the name of Jesus, get out. Very different. Mm-hmm. So instead of asking God to do it, I'm saying in the name of Jesus, get out. Now, when you do that, you've thrown down the gauntlet and said, let's go. And you have consented to a fight, spiritually and physically.
This is very interesting, Adam, because it goes to, in distinguishing deliverance from exorcism, that the priest in a unique way is acting in persona Christi here. It verges on first person singular. Yes. I absolve you. This is my body. I expel you. You have to leave. I know it's an analogy, but perhaps it's helpful to think of it in more direct personal terms.
And it's not only in persona Christi, but it's with apostolic authority. That seems to be the critical turning point. The priest can speak as a priest. Remember, exorcism is a sacramental, not a sacrament. So the priest is acting in his priesthood. He can say, in the name of Jesus, get out. But until he has an apostle's authority backing him up, when the bishop says, you can do this, I give you my authority, that's the turning point. And that's why our Protestant brothers and sisters run into trouble, is because what they're doing works up to a point, but with a full-blown case, what we see time and time again is that the deliverance work just agitates the problem. It doesn't resolve it, because you need an apostle's authority, which, my understanding, I haven't done a deep enough analysis of the original languages in the scripture, but the full authority that Jesus gave to the church was to the apostles, not to the entire church.
That makes sense. And it casts a new light on what we mean by apostolic succession. The fact that the demon knows about a cell phone conversation in the hallway that the bishop, that all he has to do is assent, even a mental act, confirmed by a word, is known by the demon. It's very interesting. It just reminds me of the four marks of the church: one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic.
Yeah.
Another feature of the activity of demons I've learned from your book, Adam, is that every few pages that you advert to this, and that's that they're extremely legalistic. They are like rule hounds and Philadelphia lawyers, with all due respect from my Philadelphia lawyer friends. Talk a little bit about the legalism of demons.
Well, when they look at the book of Job, and that will teach you a tremendous amount about how all of this works. When the demon wants to do something extraordinary beyond temptation, he has to ask God's permission, because he's bound. He's got a set of rules, legal rules, that he operates under. He can only go so far. Basically, he can only tempt you. He can't scratch you. He can't shove you down the stairs. He can't squeeze your arm. He can't do any of that stuff. He would like to, but he can't. So he has to go to God and say, this person did such and such. I should now be able to do this. And then if he gets permission, based on what the person's free will action was of opening that door, he then exerts it to the fullest that he's given permission to do. So he's claiming rights. And when it comes to the exorcism, one of the questions that comes up is, how did you get here? By what right are you possessing this person? And they will tell us, this and this was done, therefore I'm allowed to possess them. They will make a claim through a legal argument. And so the process is a combination of undoing the rights that were given by the person and then the actual prayers of exorcism. You can't expel a demon if it still has the rights to be there, because God doesn't violate our free will. If you have somebody who got heavily involved in witchcraft or Satanism, and I mean the real thing, and wanted to be possessed and still wants to be possessed, you cannot exorcise them, because God doesn't violate their free will. You can pray that they receive the grace to want to be free, but you can't, against their will, free them.
Right. Adam, in your experience, what are common avenues into the demonic realm for people that leads to oppression and infestation and oppression? Things like these smudging ceremonies using smoke and feathers in these rituals, kind of pagan rituals, Ouija boards. Maybe their name is Legion. Any 6 or 8 you can name off the top of your head?
Well, the main cluster of them, and if it probably won't be a surprise, surround the first commandment. So almost every extraordinary, really bad demonic problem comes from a violation of the first commandment. So the person has done what? They've turned to a spirit other than God for comfort, information, or power is usually what it boils down to. I'm scared about when I die. I'm sad that so-and-so died. I want to talk to them again or know that they're somewhere. I want information about some hidden information that'll give me influence in the world. I'm seeking things, and I'm telling God, I don't trust you. I'm not going to wait on you. I'm not going to pray and see if it's good for me and that you'll grant it. I'm going to go to this other spirit and cut a deal and get things on my terms when I want them. And that violation of the first commandment is what is almost always behind these bad demonic problems. Now, the milder demonic problems, the oppression, leading up to the severe stuff. And oppression can get really bad, but I mean the beginning of oppression usually comes from spirit communication, dabbling in black magic, cursed objects. And what's a cursed object? We can bless anything, right? So the priest can bless anything, your bottle of water, he can bless your desk, he can bless your car, your home.
Your dog.
Your dog. Likewise, people involved in black magic can curse or attach the demonic to anything, or essentially give the demonic rights over something. So if I have this pen that has been cursed and I bring it into my office and leave it on my desk, the demon says, I have rights to this pen. You brought this pen into this space, therefore I can be active in this space. So these cursed objects can be part of it, where the person didn't so much do something to break the first commandment, but another person did and connected the demonic with something, and then that was brought into my space. So essentially it's first commandment violations. Now what you mentioned about smoke, feathers, all the trappings of essentially kind of pagan religion.
Right, dream catchers, you see these a lot on rear view mirrors.
Right. So most of them, of course, are just nothing. They're just things that people made. And it's more about the meaning you put into it, right? So somebody might have a cross on their wall and they don't really ascribe much meaning to it or put much heart into it or place much value in it. They think of it as decorative. And to them, it doesn't have a big meaning. Now, if that cross was properly blessed, it's still going to have a positive effect on those that behold it and the room that it's in, regardless of the person's attitude, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of this occult stuff, it's not cursed. It's just stuff. And it's more about my thinking and the way I engage with it impacts how it affects me. So you could put a pentagram on the wall, and that's going to mentally be negative for most people. And they're going to be thinking of Baphomet, and they're going to have negative connotations from the movies, and it's going to psychologically be depressing and negative. But if it's cursed, it's going to have a much greater effect. And so the danger is you go to these occult shops, you go to the local witchcraft shop that claims to be all positive and gemstones and happy little sparkly dragons.
Yeah.
And if somebody's really involved in witchcraft there, they're cursing those objects. You bring them home thinking it's some good thing for your house, and you're bringing cursed incense into your house, and now suddenly there's banging in the closet, and something's poking your feet when you're trying to sleep, and there's black shadows in the corner of the room that are moving, and then you're calling for help, wondering what happened. That kind of infestation can start because when you play with the occult, even if you're just at the beginning of dabbling, you could pick up some stuff that's been really cursed and really connected with evil.
Adam, how common are black masses?
Well, it depends on what a black mass is. You know, a lot of what people think of as black masses, I mean, there's been versions of it that go way back to the beginning of the church with certain heretical cults that purposely did things that were an inversion or a perversion of Christian worship services before the Mass was even really structured and formalized. There's always been mockeries of the Christian sacrifice, the reenactment of the Last Supper. What form that takes varies tremendously down through history. What I can tell you is what would be more of a real Black Mass, a more serious Black Mass, would never happen in the public the way we've seen the stunts that have gone on in the last 5 or 10 years, where you've seen the stuff where,
like campus groups,
yeah,
a kind of mass-marketed Black Mass, which is not maybe really a Black Mass.
Exactly, because a real Black Mass, there would be criminal activity. It's a brutal, ugly thing that involves criminal activity that you, by definition, couldn't do in the public because you would get arrested. So, in some cases,
murder?
depending on what version you're talking about, yeah. So that's just part of it. I mean, I'm not going to get into the ugliness of some things that I've heard about, but so basically it varies tremendously. And usually what it really is kind of a stunt that centers around defiling the Eucharist and insulting the Eucharist as much as possible is really the core of a Black Mass in most cases. And that's why Satanists and people involved in various forms of devil worship, that's why they want to steal the Eucharist. They always go after the Catholic Eucharist because they seem to know that God is actually there, that Jesus is actually there. They're not going to other denominations because they want to try to insult God as much as possible. Which, of course, how much can you genuinely insult God? I mean, yeah, it's kind of silly. It's kind of like the fish in the fishbowl saying, I'm going to insult the person that comes in and puts food in the bowl. Like, it's kind of silly.
Gotcha. Well, it's also reason number 342 to receive Holy Communion on the tongue. That would get rid of a lot of problems right there. It's interesting to me, Adam, that Hollywood routinely mocks the Catholic Church, doesn't have a lot of affection for Christian faith. Not 100% true, but generally. But when the devil shows up, all the big guns wear Roman collars.
Sure.
It's a sort of a secular instinct about what the real power of the Catholic Church is. I know that on the Blu-ray commentary by Friedkin in The Exorcist, he's a Jewish agnostic, and he says, I made this movie because I wanted to show the world that the answer to evil is the Roman Catholic priesthood in this world. He says this in the director's commentary.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
there seems to be, and I'm not picking on other faiths or religions and being denigrating at all, but it's fairly common that other denominations and even other religions, in some cases, come to the Catholics. Certainly the Protestant denominations, not always. Again, the mild cases, those types of prayers work. But in the full-blown serious situations, they come to the Catholics.
I understand that was the case with the boy in the state of Maryland, the 1949 case that became the basis for Blatty's movie. It was a Methodist minister, I believe, and he basically said, I'm out of my depth here, which is an interesting dynamic there.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of interest in talking with us, meaning the Catholic community from the Protestant world. I've made friends within a very large Protestant conference that goes on every year. It's a huge event, and they had me come a few years back and wanted me to talk about this world. And of course, I talked about apostolic authority and the role of Mary, which is very pronounced within exorcism, not something that we bring about. It happens spontaneously, and a bunch of areas that are normally points of contention, between Protestants and Catholics. But it wasn't at all a negative conversation. And in fact, a number of ministers came up to me privately and said, thank you for saying what you said, and agreed that when they had come across full-blown cases, it had been really difficult and hadn't gone well. So, yeah, again, I think the apostolic authority seems to be the definitive factor.
Adam, what are some of the criteria that you look for to validate or confirm demonic possession? Like going to the real hard cases that are obviously well beyond psychiatric illness. What kinds of signs do you look for?
Well, the classic signs of possession that the church looks for is knowledge of languages the person doesn't
Hmm.
know. So, way beyond just maybe knowing a word or two of Latin. Detecting the holy, and that means being aware of the holy. And if I hold a crucifix up over you and you cringe, well, psychologically that's obvious,
Yeah.
right? So that wouldn't count. But if I have a relic of Mother Teresa in my pocket, and you say, "Oh, Mother Teresa's here, get away from me," and I haven't said a word about it, well, that's a very different thing now. So that's a detecting the holy that is a little more validating. Then there's supernatural strength, which you would never really diagnose based on that alone, because in psychiatric settings, you can see tremendous strength. But with the in possession, they never get tired, is the big difference. Um, and then knowledge of hidden things. And so in the movies, this is always saying, recounting your secret sins. Like, oh, what you shouldn't be here. We saw you last week when you did this or this, or
Yeah.
last year. Um, that doesn't actually happen hardly ever, because everybody goes to confession before they go to the exorcism first off. And by the way, sins that are confessed are inadmissible in court,
Right.
meaning
Yes.
the demons don't bring them up
Yeah.
on anybody's part. So confession wipes them from the slate. They're literally not allowed to claim anything based on them. And that's a reminder to all our listeners and viewers, go to confession. It is absolutely binding in the spiritual world. It is very, very real. So anyway, it's languages, strength, knowledge of hidden things, and detecting the holy. Now, you don't have all of those necessarily. The languages is the easiest one, because very commonly demons will start speaking in languages the person doesn't know, or they'll know languages, be able to respond.
I see.
So the example I always give is an old case. A woman raised on a farm in Pennsylvania with a high school education was interrogated in English, French, Latin, Lithuanian, and German, and properly responded to all the languages. And she only had a faculty in English, a facility with English. So basically, the most common ones we go after is languages and detecting the holy. The other ones, they sometimes come up. The demon will accidentally tip its hand and reveal some knowledge sometimes. And the strength, you would never diagnose just on the strength. It's more of a secondary thing.
So an accumulative diagnosis, right? It's never just one or two things. It's kind of a full picture, and you get this whole, you say this whole constellation fits.
Yeah, and the evidence mounts up over time until you come to the point where you say, I can't rationalize this away. The extreme situations that are very rare, but I was in Rome at the Vatican, talking with a priest involved at St. Peter's, and many years ago now, and he was laughing and he said, "I'll tell you a funny story." He said, "I have a friend who's a principal of a school here in Rome," and he said, "My friend called me one day, and he said, Father, you need to get down here. This is your problem." And he said, "What do you mean it's my problem?" He said, "Well, one of my students is walking on the ceiling of my office right now." And he said, "You need to get down here and deal with it." So, if somebody was walking on the ceiling, it would, you pretty quickly jump to you check for wires, and then you'd say, okay, that's very likely. Just like that kid we had here in the States a few years ago that walked up the wall backwards in front of the social workers at the hospital and the hospital staff. Something like that. It kind of jumps ahead in the line.
Could you say things like that are sort of show-off stunts that actually have the devil overplay his card? It's kind of obvious. I mean, if he's going for subtlety, that's not really the way to do it.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure why he would do something that self-destructive outside of, he might have a mindset of demoralizing this person is worth more to hell than losing the case. So their strategy isn't always just destroy this person. The strategy is, how can this possession affect the world?
I see.
So their view isn't necessarily just that person.
Yeah.
Their view is, given this person, how many other people can we affect?
Which is, in a way, a legalistic way of thinking, sort of a pro-con return on investment calculus.
Yes, exactly. That's why I said, like, the higher level demons don't always come to fight for the case, because hell may not be that invested in that case. They may just give up and leave.
I see.
Versus strategically, other cases they might think are very important.
I want to put my listeners in the room right now. This is from page in the intro, prologue. The quote, "The spirit glared with hatred to the exorcist, suddenly calm, but for her hissing, the demon slowly turned toward me," that'd be you. Casually it said, "You seem a little shaky today." I looked at it in the eye for a moment and refocused on my job, gently restraining this one arm. Something about that comment, Adam, unsettled me deeply. Can they read your mind, or are they looking at external signs and try to keep you off your game?
They're looking at external signs. Yeah. Yeah. They're very good at picking up on things. They've been watching us probably for the last however long we've been here, depending on how you want to view Genesis. They know us very well. And I was shaky that day. I had been at many sessions in that particular case, and that particular day I was shaky and a little bit off. And yeah, it was, I think what it was doing was not only, I think the idea there was not only do I notice you and I notice your state today in this session, but the deeper message there was, you're familiar to me.
That's right. I know you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the deeper message, because that was at the beginning of the session, things were just getting started. And it kind of, through all the gyrations and straining, just suddenly stopped and relaxed and turned, and in a conversational tone said, "You're a little shaky today." And then went back to its theatrics. And that's why it was so chilling, is I had a realization that I was now really in a world that I probably won't back out of and probably can't back out of at this point. Like, I'm on their radar, and it's basically you either push all the chips in and as much as you can beg God for further conversion and commitment and just move forward without thought for yourself or thinking of the danger that in theory you're in, though if you're doing this for God, there's no danger because he gives permission for whatever they do. And they've said they're not allowed to harm the people that God appoints to do this work. So we know that, and we see that through experience. But however, that's why that was chilling at that time. I was like, I'm really in this now, was the thought.
Do you ever feel even off hours like you're a person of interest because of the work you do?
Oh, I know I am. They are no longer subtle with me, and with many people involved in this work. I'm not saying I'm particularly special, but I've had possessed people call here and the demon take over and start talking on the phone multiple times, sometimes random people, sometimes old cases. I've had them step out of the crowd in a body and make a comment to make it very clear what they are, who they are. They've said they want to kill me, and they've said they want to kill me for specific events. So I'll be in another state, another part of the country. There'll be a big victory for the person, and the demons are humiliated. And I'll get home, and then I'll get an encounter with one in the wild that's just not seeking help, and they'll make it very clear. So, but for the grace of God and God tying their hands and Saint Michael and all the other wonderful help that we get, I would say they're not very happy, but that's kind of what you want, right? So if they were not annoyed with you or pleased with you, you're doing something wrong.
It's a sign of things going right.
Exactly. Yeah. So the more stars I get on my term paper from them, the better in terms of them hating me, because that means to some extent, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
It's like the old Air Force metaphor. When the bomber is over the target, the most flak flies up to try to take you down, take you out.
Mm-hmm.
Adam, ever meet someone at a party or some social setting, and with your experience and discernment, you can kind of tell there's something going on there that's not just off or not just mental illness, but seems to be diabolical in nature? I mean, do you meet people socially where you just, it's not someone you want to engage with them in that context?
Yeah. So, Patrick, my thought, my sense of discernment is, this is just my personal opinion. I believe that discernment comes from God on a moment by moment basis when God wants to provide it, and it's provided for a purpose. I don't really believe in walking around with like sensitivity and special powers that, are mine, and I get to know things other people don't know. Most of the time, it's completely flatline, nothing. Life is completely normal. I go about my work. But if there's somebody that's a danger or a threat or should be on my radar, God will point that out, and I'll get that discernment and information so that I know what I'm dealing with. So I know there's that spirit is present. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's God giving me a heads up. Yeah.
Those are actual graces that he gives all of us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's a good caution not to overthink things, not to find a demon behind every shrub and behind every event. There's a kind of banal nature to this. The fact that the demon said to you, "You seem a little shaky today." There's a kind of a little note of inert, uncreative, boring way or predictable way of proceeding.
Yes. Well, that's because in the beginning in this work, when they know you don't know what's really going on, they put on a big show. It's very theatrical. They do the stuff in the movies. The big booming voices and the impressive things and the preternatural things, maybe stuff flying around or whatever. And all this is parlor tricks. It's all smoke and mirrors just to rattle people and to give them the edge, to make them seem like they're the ones in charge of the situation. They're the big scary thing in the room. But once you know how it all works, they drop all that, and it becomes very businesslike. I've gone to help with cases in whatever state that I'm in, and the demon will be like, "Oh, you again," and they don't even waste time. And I've had them show up and be like, "Oh yeah, I know this one well," like they don't even want to they're so bored in terms of having encountered, particular people so many times. They know that stuff isn't going to work, so they don't even try it anymore, and it becomes very banal.
Their job, their motivation, you could say, at that point, is to get you to stop the exorcism.
That's the only, yes.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
That's the clash.
All those.
Right.
Yeah,
stop versus go.
Yeah, all the theatrics, all the stuff you see in the movies, which is an exaggeration of real life. All that is just designed to derail the exorcism and get the people to be distracted and stop. That's because the demon has no win. If the person wants to be free and they're repenting of what they did to let this demon in, the demon's going to lose. And he knows that. So his only option is to scare these people or distract them so that everybody gets tired and we stop for the day, and I get another week to work on this person.
Is there an average number of days or sessions that you deal with? Because if you've only seen a couple of movies, it's 1 or 2 sessions and you're done. But they can be a marathon in real life, spreading over weeks. What's the longest you've heard?
The longest I've heard of is over 20 years.
Wow.
The average is 6 months to 2 years.
And the possessed person has to be motivated to continue to that point of release.
Well, they're released from layers at it. All through that process, they're released from layers. So, and people would say, like, well, why doesn't God just free them completely in one session? It seems so cruel. But here's the thing. when we grow and we develop in life, think of somebody who grew up in an alcoholic home with a lot of verbal abuse and a lot of neglect going on. That person's fundamental character was wounded and changed and shaped by that home life, so that when they're an adult, they're depressed, they're anxious, they have psychiatric issues, they probably have addiction issues. You can't radically change them 100% in one therapy session. It takes years because the person doesn't know how to be in a healthy way. They only know how to be what they know, okay? And that's how they grew up. When people are possessed, they've generally been possessed for 10, 20 or more years by the time they ask for help, usually. And so the spiritual self and the psychological self has been deformed and bent because they've grown with this over the years, and the demon has insinuated itself more and more over time. So Jesus frees them a little bit at a time, one session, a few demons at a time, so that they can readjust, figure out who they are, get their feet under themselves, and come back and get the next layer off, because that's as much as they can handle. We've had cases where somebody got delivered of a lot at once, and they say, I'm disoriented. I don't know how to be. I don't know who I am. And they'll come back the next week and tell us, I invited it back in because I had such an existential crisis and an implosion in myself that I didn't know how to be. And the demon had been a companion for so long. So God frees them as fast as they can handle, because they're adjusting in all the different ways to the fundamental change to themselves.
Yeah, it does make sense. I was thinking of two things at once. One, when our Lord cured the man who was blind with the mud and the spittle, it wasn't a full 100% healing. It was done in stages. You see trees, okay, let's go back and do some more according to that person's need. And then also the woman from whom 7 demons were expelled. Clean the house out. Well, keep it clean, Jesus says, because you'll have, you're playing with fire. If you don't think they're going to come back 7-fold, you know where that is in the Gospels, I'm sure.
Yeah, and the idea there, I think, is that you don't want to just kick the demons out, but not put anybody else in charge of the house. So the idea there is, and we see this, by the way, in cases, say a couple demons came out at this session. At the end of the session, the priest prays that the Holy Spirit come and heal and fill in where those demons were, the space that they occupied within the person's soul, within themselves, however you want to think about that. And if you don't do that, the person will walk away disoriented with headaches, feeling dizzy, and then they'll usually relapse.
And I would think that friendship and Christian brotherhood and sisterhood and so on is extremely important. Someone to surround your fire brigade rescue circles that firemen use when there's a building burning. You want people to support you because it's incarnational here.
Right. And that is a critical component that's not always missing, but is often missing and is so important. And then aftercare is super important, because Jesus wants you to not only be freed of the evil, basically, by the way, possession is God's last-ditch effort to let us know what you're playing with, what you're running to, what you are hugging and embracing in your life is going to destroy you and damn you. It's a last-ditch effort of God saying, okay, I want you to fully experience what you're choosing so that you will turn back to me and ask to be free. So it's God trying to free that soul and show them what they've chosen in a raw form. So it's not God being malicious. It's God saying, the stove is hot. Don't put your hand on the stove. And then eventually the kid burns their fingers and says, oh, the stove is hot. I don't want to put my hand there. I won't do that again. It's basically like that. But with the aftercare, if that isn't present, there can be a temptation to fall back, because God not only wants you to be free and pull back from the cliff, but he wants you to then grow into who he intended you to be, the full, beautiful, person that all your gifts and all of the work that you're to do in your life is manifested in a good way.
And so that you can live away from the edge of the cliff.
Yes. Not only pull back from the cliff, but then go to the village and live a full life, bring life and life abundantly. So that's where that aftercare in the community is so critical.
Can the souls of the damned possess a person? Or is that a different category?
Not on their own. So it's very common that we encounter damned souls in a demonic possession situation, but never just on their own. So Judas is a fairly common one that a lot of people have encountered. There's a number of others. Usually it's somebody from the family line of the person that you're dealing with. It's not always somebody famous like Judas or biblical figures. We've had Herod, who would only speak ancient Hebrew, of course. So what you see with them is because they're the property of the demons own them because they're damned. They're kind of carried around like a suitcase. The demon will bring them along, and during the exorcism will push them forward to animate the body so the demon gets a rest. And the damned souls, you can't boss them around because Jesus gave authority over demons, not human souls. And so it's a trick that the demon plays to see if they can breathe on the ropes and get a rest, basically.
Yeah, almost like a Charlie McCarthy ventriloquist dummy.
Yes.
Kind of a temporary mouthpiece.
Yes. Yeah.
There's a book. It's about a theory that's taken root in a lot of Catholic preaching. It's called "Dare We Hope That All Men Be Saved," by Hans von Balthasar. And since he believes it's reasonable that we hope that all men be saved, there might not be a category called the damned. Hell might be empty in the end. There might be no one in hell. What are your thoughts on that theory?
Well, I'm not a qualified theologian, but it seems to me if you read Scripture and you read Jesus's description, that the road to hell is wide and well traveled, and the gate to heaven is narrow and few find it. Mm-hmm. I think Jesus was pretty clear about it. It's not, it can be daunting, but if you do research on the theme of the fewness of the saved and the number of church fathers and saints that have had visions, now it's private revelation. You don't have to believe it, but it's part of the tradition of the church. Not only is hell real, but the fewness of the saved is, now that pendulum swings down through time. Sometimes the pendulum swings towards a lot of people are damned, and other times it's trendy or in your age. It's extreme mercy. Personally, from being around exorcism a lot and seeing what they're doing, and seeing what they do to people, and the depravity of the sin that they draw people into, it sure seems to me that there's damned souls. Now, you might say, well, you can't trust that wasn't just a demon pretending to be Herod or Judas, and that's true. You can't be definitive. Only God knows for sure.
Or a family member might be trickier because you couldn't have known that. an ancestor, someone identifiable only to the possessed.
Yeah. But still, you could say the demon watched that family and knew how to pretend to be them, et cetera, et cetera. But just personally, it doesn't seem scriptural. God is merciful, but he's also just, right? And so his justice is not negotiable. And if we truly reject him, we reject him. We damn ourselves. That's my understanding. You choose to damn yourself. You reject your relationship with God.
And God gives you what you want, essentially.
Yeah, because he doesn't violate our free will. The free will is so important.
Adam, sometimes news accounts will, we've got a few minutes left here. The accounts will say things like, exorcisms are on the rise, the devil's been let loose here and now. I want to let you know if you think there's a before and after, or if there's a rise in possessions in cases like this, with the availability of the internet and the fact that hardcore pornographic images, illegal, terrifying things that we can't even discuss here are only a few clicks away from someone. How much of the normalizing or the mainstreamization of porn has led to openings into the occultic world?
Well, I think the internet impact is more in the occult as opposed to pornography. The availability of information, like for the kids to watch a YouTube video about divination or about playing, these various games that they play, divination games, spirit communication. I think
The Slender Man, remember that?
and the what is it, Charlie and other things.
Yeah.
And then honestly, the biggest impact I see is ghost hunting, because spirit communication is a violation of the first commandment. And so we've normalized ghost hunting and spiritualism. It's a resurgence of spiritualism, but now instead of tipping tables and Ouija boards, it's digital recorders. I've seen so many train wrecks in that world. And a lot of the people that have those TV shows, their private lives are train wrecks. They're being ravaged, but they don't put that part on TV. I know a lot of those people because they know me, because I'm a somewhat known figure. So it's a very serious issue. Now, that's not to downplay pornography. I think pornography is a huge issue. And by the way, sexual activity is a big deal in the spiritual, in the legalism. When you have sex with somebody outside of the sacramental container of marriage, you consent to share the spiritual baggage that person has, because we know scripturally two become one when they have a sexual union. Spiritually, they become one person in a sense, maybe just for a short time. There's a sharing of personhood to some degree. We've seen multiple possession cases where the demon says, they had sex with so-and-so, I was in so-and-so, therefore I'm in them. And the pornography has normalized the kind of hookup culture with the generation coming up, where sexuality is an app on your phone and you just go have indiscriminate sex and you model it after the pornography, because the pornography tells you that sex is casual. And what we know in the spiritual is there's a reason God said this needs to be contained within marriage. It needs to be committed and monogamous, because you're spiritually sharing. And so it's like a cancer, a spiritual cancer, and sexuality is one of the ways that it spreads.
So it starts off in its essence as a holy fire. It's because of its holiness that it needs this protection.
Yes.
Not because that's the lie the world tells. Oh, the Catholic Church teaches that sex is dirty. Quite the contrary. The Catholic vision is much higher than the world's.
It's that sex is spiritually so powerful of a transaction that the church wants to protect both that transaction and the people engaging in it. Because, again, if you have sex with somebody, we're dealing with a case right now. Person didn't know the person was involved in black magic, got into a relationship, had sex with them, ended up possessed. I'm not saying everybody that has casual sex is going to become possessed at all, but our culture is becoming less Christian, and more people are playing with the occult and pagan religions and then having indiscriminate sex. So yeah, I think it's an issue.
What about yoga? There are various degrees of seriousness and perhaps danger levels. It's one of my wishes as a Catholic that the magisterium be a little more, not forthcoming, but give some clarity on the issue. There's a document, 20 years old now, Jesus Christ, the Bearer of the Waters of Life. And there's a footnote in there, some mention of yoga. What's your take on yoga as an entryway?
I think it's very serious. It's a very serious danger. Yoga is worship postures for Hindu gods, where the idea is you assume the posture associated with that god. So we might hold our hands like this and pray, and that's part of our way of connecting with God and praying. They're assuming a posture that connected with a particular deity, then they're saying that deity's name over and over with their breath to invoke it and invite them into themselves. In a particular way, people can look up what's called Kundalini with a K. You'll figure it out. Go on YouTube, type in Kundalini dangers, and watch the documentaries there. The goal, the end goal of a lot of yoga, and there's different branches of it, in its original setting is to awaken the Kundalini spirit, which is a serpent spirit at the base of the spine, that then over time, as you keep doing yoga, moves up the spine until it reaches the top of the head, which is called the crown chakra within their system. When it reaches here from the base of the spine, that serpent then causes what are called kriyas, Kriyas, which are involuntary body movements and animal-like vocalizations, which are your sign that you have successfully achieved this goal within yoga. So,
like jerky movements, Tourette-like barking
yes,
animal sounds.
yes, growling, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so the end goal is a disorder of the person and a lack of or a loss of control over your personhood with this involuntary stuff. And the goal is to awaken a spirit that's an alien spirit. It's not part of the normal human condition. You need to be initiated, and you can watch videos on this too within yoga, by a master who comes and lays hands on you to start the process of this Kundalini spirit awakening within you. Now, some people will say it already resides in you already, and what the master is doing is something different, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is it's a pagan worship posture designed to awaken a spirit that takes over your body to some extent.
How similar is all this to Reiki? Because that's really grown in popularity in health centers and parishes and hospitals even.
Yeah, Reiki, I've actually seen more oppression and possession cases from Reiki than yoga by far. Reiki, from the data from actually how many cases come from it, is far more dangerous, just based on the number of cases. I think most people don't get involved in Kundalini yoga here in the West. I think they keep it at the exercise level. Reiki, on the other hand, is really insidious. Reiki is one of the many strange cults that arose in Japan after the bomb was dropped to end World War II. And there was a big cultural upheaval with all of that. They only tell the Westerners usually about the first 3 levels of Reiki, which ends with Reiki Master, which you can basically do in a weekend if you pay your money. And then the higher levels, usually up to 5, they don't tell Westerners about that as much, but at those levels, it's acknowledged that it's a familiar spirit that is providing all of these parlor tricks and supposed healings and powers, and you get into the more typical witchcraft stuff, astral projection, leaving your body, clairvoyance, all of these other typical occult powers come at the higher levels that they don't tell the Westerners about. So again, it's a violation of the first commandment. You're turning to a spirit other than God, because when you get initiated into Reiki, a person draws with oils that are consecrated in some way in their version on your hands, on your palms, sometimes on your head. They do symbols, they draw symbols in the air over you that are occult symbols to initiate you into the spirit. You have to request that the spirit initiate you with this Reiki master. And
that is creepy.
Yeah, you can watch videos of, go to YouTube and type in Reiki initiation, and you'll see exactly what they do.
This kind of reminds me of Scientology, where the high big buck paying few, the initiates, get to learn about Xenu and what happened 50 bazillion years ago.
Yeah.
The kind of false substitute.
Yeah. Except in Reiki, whereas I think Scientology is mostly just a scam to make money, which is pretty much what L. Ron Hubbard said. They had there's a famous meeting of him and some friends where they were trying to say, how can you make the most money in life? And they decided that starting your own religion was the best way to make the greatest fortune. So I think that's more of what that's about. But Reiki, unfortunately, is about familiar spirits and occult powers.
What's the closest distance between our listeners and viewers and you? Is it really just demonology.com?
Yeah, there's a lot of basic information there. It's important to understand that because I work for the church formally and I work for my bishop, I can't consult on cases that are another bishop's authority. So if somebody doesn't live in this diocese and they write me and they say, I need help, give me some guidance, I have to refer them to their diocese because I can't overstep my bounds. They're a subject of a different bishop. So I provide a lot of basic information on the website that should answer a lot of questions. And then they can approach their diocese. The diocese central office would be best and say, do you have any priests that are trained in this area? If you just go to your parish priest, that's fine too. And in fact, you should start with your parish priest. But if they say, I don't know much about that, go to the diocese and say, do you have anybody trained up? Because your parish priest may not know who that is.
That makes sense. The mandated exorcist is often not disclosed. The name is usually not published, right?
Right.
But you take calls from priests and bishops looking for guidance and resources.
Sure. Yeah, Bishop Zubik is very supportive of helping other dioceses. We consult and help with many dioceses that are setting up programs. I also consult and I'm going to be doing some training in the Far East. And I also have a Pastoral Manual, which is only available to priests. It's not published, but any priests that see this, that want to contact me once I verify that you're a legitimate Catholic priest, that's a Pastoral Manual that covers this whole ministry. And it's been in use for many years, and it's been reviewed by senior exorcists over in Rome. So,
one last question, Adam, in case people who listen and watch this tonight will be tempted to read other things. There's a book in circulation, I want to say the 70s, by Malachi Martin. It's called Hostage to the Devil. I had to put the book down, and every friend of mine, every buddy of mine that has seen the book has picked it up, had the same reaction. There's something very off about the narrative. It's hard to articulate. Martin was a very strong, vivid prose writer. There's some very wonky, disturbing things in that book, and I'm not sure it's a good book for people to read. Maybe just me.
Yeah. So one, I think it's too graphic, and I think it would, I think even he would say it would wound your imagination. Some of the images that are described in there, they would stay with you and I think would harm you. So I don't think it's worth reading. One
of the cases is a transgender case, which is kind of prescient.
Yeah. And the other thing about that book is I think it gives too much honor to the demons in the sense that it highlights the dangers too much and makes it seem like the demons are more kind of in charge and to be feared than the real situation. And so you end up thinking like, oh, this guy almost got physically killed and, the demon's throwing the priest around the room. And that's just not what happens in what we see in cases. So I think it glorifies them a little bit too much and it makes it too scary. And honestly, if you want to read his theologic kind of reflections at the end of the book, that might be more helpful. But I think the graphic stories, I don't think it's that helpful.
I spoke to another exorcist before, and he describes the Roman ritual. It's like the action of a bat smashing into someone's head. It's not a fair fight here. The demon is unfairly matched by Jesus Christ through his priest. So it's not like getting into a mixed martial art battle where no one knows how it's going to end. It's not true.
No, not at all. That's why I said the only thing the demon has is distraction, because he's on a jet sled heading towards a brick wall, and all he can do is hit the wall. He's going to lose. And when the priest has apostolic authority, the priest can say, sit down, put your hands in your lap, and be quiet till I tell you to talk. And the demon will go over and sit down and put their hands in their lap and wait for instructions. So, the difference is there are cases where the person hasn't repented yet, where the demon will show more orneriness than that.
Yeah. But
but it's more about the person hasn't come along pastorally and repented. But basically, yes, it's a very unfair fight in the sense that it's not a fight at all. It's God reclaiming a child, from an enemy that child has fallen to, and nobody's going to stop God. There's no win for the demon. The demon loses in the exorcism, and then he loses at the final judgment. And they know that. They make comments to us. They made comments how they're harming the church. And they'll say, yes, we're harming the church. And they say, in the next breath, they'll literally say, but we know he won't allow that. We're just waiting to see what he does.
Interesting.
So, they are a defeated foe. They're defeated now and they're defeated later.
Score forever. Jesus 1, Satan 0.
Basically, yes.
Almost 0. Adam Blai, I want to thank you for writing the book. It's called Hauntings, Possessions, and Exorcisms, published by Emmaus Road, who published my first book, The Contraception Deception. So get the book. If you want to join Coffin Nation, get on the list at coffinnation.com, the largest online community of culture restorers. Adam, thanks a lot for your work. Godspeed. Thanks for your time tonight. I've learned a ton.
Yeah, it's been really nice to spend time with you, Patrick. God bless you.
You as well.
Thank you.
This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?
Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.